What's up, everyone? Welcome to season 4 of My Boulevard podcast. This season, we're doing something special. I am here with my co-host, Missie. Say what's up to the people, Missie.
Hello, I'm so excited to join you, Dhati. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to talk about the who, what, when, where, how, and why of urban missions.
That's right. This season, we are going to be walking through together, like live, real conversations. We're going to be talking about real questions, really practical wisdom about how to do ministry in urban environments.
Yeah, this is going to be a primer for all of us. So let's join this journey. Let's grow, learn, and push forward urban missions together.
Stay tuned. This season, we're going to talk about how you can do ministry where you live, where you work, and where you worship. So let's go.
Let's go.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of This Is My Boulevard podcast. My name is Dhati Lewis.
And I'm Missie Branch.
And we are here on the first stop, Missie.
The first stop.
Right? Presence and immersion.
So we did this. You got converted. You know that God has called you. You got your
ready.
Context. Yes,
you
you're
got
excited.
Your vision from Burden.
Yes,
You've been
come
trained.
on. Yes.
Now it's time to be intentional.
Let's do it.
This is like that first day where you just like, you're on the field, you're ready, you did all your things, you got the family settled, you're ready to go. You just like, it's time. It's the first day you're walking out, you're getting on the train, you're doing your thing. You're feeling
the texture and the vibes. Yes,
right?
yes.
You're being present.
Okay, so we know there's got to be 3 or 4 things. What are they?
Right,
I know it. I already know it. Yes.
You got it. You know. I mean, it's not a message.
Yes.
It's not,
if you ain't got points, right? You got to have points.
you know, and I'm just going to say the 3 points of this. Number 1, like as soon as you get ready to go, you got to first stop and listen.
Yep.
That's the first step. You got to first listen first, right? Then after you listen, pray.
Wow.
Pray.
Now, I will say, it's almost like some of these are, I would say, in order of difficulty, because stopping and listening is already hard. Because sometimes we can show up into community and say, I already know what you need. I already know what this looks like. But when you get into relationship with people in the community, you build that proximity, that relationship, and then you stop talking. And you listen. You're hearing what they need, hearing what they've been through, hearing about the history, hear about their visions and dreams.
And then you start talking to God first before you even start talking to them.
Then you get to praying.
You start talking to God.
Yes.
And you know what I love about the third point is then you start participating in the story. In which God is already at work. You know, this one really gets to me in a lot of ways, and it kind of appears because I'm a goer, I'm a mover, I'm a like, let's go, achiever, let's accomplish things, let's do it, right? And here's the thing, right? It reminds me of Kadesh Barnea. It reminds me of 40 years of wandering.
Wow.
Right?
Yes.
Like you remember the story, like Joshua and Aaron, like they were like all of them, they were the only 2 out of all the people who was like, let's go into the land. Because it was like it's all flowing with milk and honey, and God's gonna give us but it was like, no. The other 10 was like, no, there's giants in the land. And they ended up not going.
Yes.
And then like God was vexed, and he was just like, man, for 40 years, he said pretty much until all the people who are over the 20 years are over are gone, man,
right?
We're going to go with your children. So now here you have Joshua, you have Caleb, right? You have they're ready to go, and they're about to go into this new land, right? But there's a problem. As soon as 40 years of waiting, wandering around, looking at, like, you're walking around looking at like the promise right there. You're just like, but they can't have it. 40 years. And you know what? The first thing that God told Joshua to do, he tells him to be strong, be courageous. But the first thing I want you to do is I want you to stop and I want you to listen to me, be strong and courageous. And he has this man walk around Jericho singing praise songs.
Yeah,
for 7 days.
I just heard the great preacher, Dr. Robert Smith, say that's called divine human instrumentality, where God will do his part, but he wants us to do our part first and out of obedience. And so that's when you really get to participate in the story, where God says, I'm going to do my part. But you have to do your part in this context.
Because
So great.
if you don't first listen and then pray and know kind of your part in God's story,
Yes.
you can't really participate well.
Right.
Right. And so you're going to end up going, because, me, I would have been that dude just kind of like, all right, just start like hacking people. And I'd have been dead in the first people. I was one of the first people dead. Right. Just thinking I'm doing
You're like
something.
Peter cutting off
You
ears
know
and
what I'm saying?
carrying on,
I'm
right?
cutting off ears. I'm doing Jesus, like reattaching things. Like, hold on. What was happening?
Well, when we talk about praying, what are we telling people to, like, what would you say this is what you need to be praying for?
I mean, oftentimes when I'm thinking about praying for is like, I think the biggest thing is thy will be done, right? I mean, because whenever you start asking God to accomplish your will, the problem is sometimes he might actually do it.
Wow.
and then you end up you're just like, why do I got this? Because fool, you prayed for
That's
it.
what you asked for.
You know what I'm saying? Like you've been praying.
Y'all
for
asked
this.
for a king.
You know
Now I
what mean?
gave you a king, right?
You like, I mean, think about that. It's just like,
Right.
Josh, like, hey, we want a king like everybody else. No,
Right.
you don't want a king. I'm your king.
I'm your king.
No. We want a king like everybody else. No,
Okay.
I'm your king. No, God, we really want a king. All right, take your king,
Hey,
right? And
here's
then
your king.
as soon as you get a king, God, I need a man. I need a woman. No, I'm that for you. No, God, but I need something tangible. No, then you got it. All right, there you go. Right, but so sometimes we think it's my will be done. So part of this is that we got to understand that this thing starts with surrender.
Yes.
Surrendering.
But I think a good healthy prayer life, particularly as a missionary, that's like an ingredient. Surrender is an ingredient to a healthy prayer life, because you're like, I read a quote, prayer is exhaling the spirit of man and inhaling the spirit of God. Yeah, it's you saying, let me flow out and let you flow in. Yep. And then while we're praying, particularly in a context, this is before we even got to run hard, you're really praying about the needs of the context, but then how do we meet those needs, Lord? Not really just me coming up with these grandiose ideas and these plans and thinking I have the answers.
Yeah.
God, these are his people. This is his community.
I love it. I mean, as you was just thinking about prayer, I was just like, man, I wonder if we have any prayer experts, here that has written books on like prayer and devotion and all those things. And I was just like, we have our very own Missie Branch who has, written about these types of things. And
I do believe in the power of prayer.
Yes.
But you know what? I think the best prayer warriors are those prayer warriors that are desperate for Jesus. Yeah. That are desperate in that they need Jesus. I think in ministry and even in our Christian walk, particularly in the Western world, we have no longer needed Jesus the way people around the world do. I mean, you have a good job, you have income, I need you in that superficial way. But those real prayer warriors are the people who are like, no, nothing is going to happen without you, Jesus. Yes, I think, that's good. Yes, so
that's really good. And and thinking about when you think about seeking the welfare of the city, right? This old Tim Keller talks about, or not Tim Keller, but he's always used to talk about
on that. Yes,
the welfare of the city. Well, when you think about that, you think about the enormity of the city. I mean, whether you're a big city, little city, you don't have to be in a place like New York. I mean, let's think about Atlanta. I just think about Fourth Ward. I was in a town the other day when there's like 4,000 people in the city. I mean, which is
the whole
still
town, right?
Like
4,000 people is a lot of people, but you're like, but if that's your whole town, you're like, that's this neighborhood.
Yeah, that's like we got 15,000 people in the old Fourth Ward, right? And I was just kind of like, man, I just thought, but like when you're in the city, you see and you're just like, man, this is such enormous, and you're putting yourself in a position where you're just like, God, unless you do your thing, the watchman watches in vain.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like, and that's really what it's about. But I think it's really important for us to understand that as a step that is going throughout all of the steps. To some degree, it's just like, you got to pray when you're listening. You got to pray as you're participating.
Yes.
You got to pray, right?
Yes.
And just as you're focusing. Let
prayer become your posture.
Yes.
So when we talk about participating in the story, you're talking about removing the idea of it just being your story and this being a community story. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, if you remember, we talked about last time was this. First of all, we're participating on that conversions of developing a vision from burden, which has to do with God's story, your personal story, the story, our story, the people you're doing it with, and then the city's story, right? And so when those come together, it's kind of like you're in that. And I think with all of those, it's just like you begin to pray and begin to press in and participate in that. But what's also unique about it is that again, we're moving from just simply the initial stop to this first stop, and you're entering and you're present and you're immersion. Like it's like day one for you. Like you're starting to think about like, all right, I got to make sure that it thy will, not my will, but as I'm entering in that we are trying to not just simply reach the community, but we want to be a part of the community.
Yes.
Right. And so I oftentimes tell people it's just like, all right, it's good early on when there's presence to trying to find the person of peace.
Yes.
But ultimately,
good.
You want to become the person of peace.
Yes.
Right. And so what is that first step to becoming the person of peace is that you got to find people of peace. Right.
That's good.
And like got to find connections. You got to seek the welfare.
So that means you have to be engaged in that community. So that means, it's one thing to be praying for a community that's way over there. And it's another thing to also, I give to children who are across the world. So I don't know the crisis that they're facing every day, but I send money, and that's honorable, noble. I praise God I can do that. Yep. But it's another thing to show up into this community and see the stuff crumbling and recognize that community has a culture that I don't necessarily know, or a culture that I've been a part of all this time, but I may have taken for granted and not understood that this is the fabric. So what does it mean for me to engage, to not just want to come in and paint myself and my stuff and my ideas all over it?
Would you say that's one of the biggest mistakes? And if not, what are some of the biggest mistakes that
I think
missionaries can make going into trying to establish presence and immersion?
I think we see how in international missions we've learned that it is silly of us to show up into a community and say, not only do I want you to worship God, I want you to worship God the way we do. So you need to dress like me, sound like me, look like me in order for it to be authentic. And I try to almost undo everything that is germane to who you are in an effort to make you like me. When I'm supposed to really take the time to learn who you are, appreciate, love who you are, and then bring the gospel to bear there. And so I think recognizing that it's not really about recreating someone's culture, but entering in and understanding and taking it on, being a part of it.
It's about presence before proclamation. It's just being present, entering in the city as a learner, as a servant, as an intercessor, right? And I think that that's important. When I remember going on a mission trip, we was in Honduras and La Mosquitia, right? In the rainforest of Honduras. But you know what? I can easily identify all the Christians that were there. And you know why?
Why?
Is because they are the ones in the middle of the rainforest, these indigenous Indians wearing like suits.
Wow.
Like wearing full-blown suits. I'm just like, why in the world are you wearing
suits?
Suits, slacks. And I was just like, some missionary
came
over and told them that this is more dignifying. This is more. And I'm just like, and this basically kind of just got them out of their culture, and everything in their culture was bad, and everything that they were bringing was good. And I was just like, man, we're missing it. And so this is one of the reasons why we oftentimes, especially in multicultural, in cities where there's diversity, there's density, that we say like, hey, we got to think about it in three ways: principle, prudence, preference, right, will influence your practice, right? And so like when we talk about principle is that there's a verse in scripture. There's a biblical verse. There's a scriptural verse that's in there. Prudence is that this is wisdom, but it's not a verse. I can't give you a verse. Preference is just my opinion versus your opinion. So principle is like, hey, don't fornicate. Prudence, wisdom is like, don't cohabitate. I can't give you a verse in the scriptures that says don't cohabitate. However, if you cohabitate, you're probably going to end up fornicating, right? And so you don't want to do that. So
privileges before their time.
Yes.
Yes.
But preference is just simply, I kiss dating goodbye. Or
Right.
you like gospel music, I like CCM.
Right.
You like, that's preference. But all three of those influences your practice. But you need, as a missionary intentionally going in somewhere, you got to understand the difference between your principles, your prudences, and your preferences as you are engaging and listening and becoming a learning. So you don't end up having indigenous people wearing suits in the middle of the rainforest.
Well, what are some ways that a missionary to a particular context, especially if it's not their own natural context, right? I'm not indigenous. How can a missionary come into this space and be a true learner?
Yeah. Well, I always think about like the idea of awareness, vision, strategy, courage, in that order, right? You start with awareness. Where are you? Right. And that's the idea we're talking about, being a listener. When you come in and you start asking questions, you just start digging, you're genuinely curious.
Yes.
Right. And I think that is
good.
the thing. Like
That's
when you
good.
become genuinely curious about something, then you're just like, okay, yeah, that's helpful. Right. And then from that, like, vision is the next one. Vision is not about you coming up something from within. Right. I love the scriptures. The old King James version used to say, where there's no vision,
the people perish.
Right.
Yes.
But I love the newer translations. Basically, it says, where there's no divine revelation,
Yes.
the people cast off restraint. Because oftentimes when we think about vision, we think of that vision has to be something that comes from me. No, really what he's saying is where God has not revealed himself.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
We are to find where God has revealed himself. Right. The people cast off. We end up doing whatever's right in our own eyes. We end up when we don't seek for where God has spoken. And then, because once you get awareness, vision, where does God want them to be? Strategy. Then it's like, how do we get there? What are the easy, obvious, and strategic steps to help them to connect? And a lot of times it's already participating where God is already at work, right? Because that's, in the communities and the things you're going to see, God is already moving. God is at work. And then the last one is courage. And that's the thing that he told Joshua, right? Be strong, be courageous, right? And the reason courageousness is not the absence of fear, but it's doing the right thing in spite of your fear.
And I think the call to be courageous is probably one of the most repeated calls in the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah, it's
good.
It's crazy because, like you said, I'm still afraid. We were talking about doing a cold plunge. I'm afraid. But that doesn't mean you can't still go do it.
Sometimes you gotta push through it. And I'm not talking about like you can have your fear, but sometimes you have to just still go, because it says the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. So we got to place our fear, in the right places. We take our fear to God, who knows what to do with our fear.
With our fear.
Right. He knows what to do with our fear. And so
this
is
I
good.
Think,
so this is the first stop.
First stop.
Right. Again, we are moved from just simply being Christian in our context to being intentional, a missionary in our context.
I like it.
Right. And so first stop is presence.
Yes.
Immersion.
And immersion.
Right.
Let's do it.
Let's go.